Mayor Brian and myself started an economic recovery committee April of 2020, pretty soon after the pandemic hit. What we realized was there was a huge benefit from having that cross-jurisdictional conversation around economic recovery. We did a lot of sharing. Hey, what are you doing about parklets? What are you doing about sign ordinances? Things like that. We've been meeting consistently since then, and I see on the attendee list are several members of the committee present. So thank you for your ongoing participation over the year, as well as being here today. So I just want to welcome everyone. This event is being recorded. We will have an opportunity for questions and answers. And I'm going to turn it over to Mayor Brian. Actually, before I do that, let me thank all the people behind the scenes. So there are the people you see on the screens, and Mayor Brian will introduce our panelists. We also have Shingi Samudzi, who is on the San Rafael Planning Commission. And behind the scenes, they're not on screen, but they were integral to making this event happen, is Kelly Warner. She's the vice chair of the San Anselmo Economic Development Committee. Small world, we've known each other for years. Thank you, Kelly. And Rebecca Bugis, who is part of the San Anselmo Economic Development Committee. So lots of people work to bring this conversation here as we try to find our way forward and to think expansively about how we can continue to have economic recovery in our communities. So Mayor Brian of the Hamlet of San Anselmo, his words, not mine. I will turn it over to you.
Hey, thanks, Mayor Kay, for those opening remarks. I just want to, give a little broad of level setting around what the symposiums are, and then provide some introductions for our guests. So my name is Brian Colbert. I'm currently the mayor of the beautiful Hamlet of San Anselmo. Welcome to the first in our series of symposiums. The future symposiums will address the following: the cannibalization of brick and mortar retail by online commerce giants, identifying high growth industries we can incubate locally, creative mixed use opportunities, and downtown economic development in our communities. Our next symposium will be offered during the latter part of June. Again, thanks to everyone for attending, and thanks again to the steering committee and everyone, Lindsay Larb behind the scenes. The pandemic has taken an immeasurable toll on so many people, businesses and institutions around the world and here in Marin County. Economic vitality has obviously been negatively impacted, particularly for our local businesses that provide a unique sense of place and community. Yet the seeds of economic recovery are present. Many entrepreneurs and businesses have adapted to address the unprecedented changes brought on by COVID. We are in recovery. Yes, it's a recovery that is spread unevenly across sectors of the economy, and many people and businesses are still struggling. According to the Federal Reserve, GDP is now expected to increase by 6.5% during 2021. Many public and private commentators expect GDP to increase by almost as much as 8%. Now is the time to lay the foundations for Marin Economy 2.0. This means it will embody forward-thinking public policies to create a business climate that empowers, attracts, and retains entrepreneurs and businesses, embeds sustainability, provides opportunities for all of our workforce, and meets the needs of our local communities, tourists and visitors alike in our towns and communities. I'm confident in 5 to 10 years from now, when stakeholders in our community look back, this series of symposiums will be one of the foundational pillars that leads to the development of the post-COVID Marin economy. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our 3 rock star panelists for our inaugural symposium, Collaborative City Making and Restaurant Trends. So let me just sort of switch to a slide so we can all see who they are. Let's see. Can everyone see my screen? My screen share? Great. Yep. So this morning, we've got John Bella, Mark Quiones, and Carlos Sanchez. John Bella is an urbanist and public space designer. He's a partner and director of GEL, a global urban strategy and design consultancy, and the co-founder of Rebar and originator of Parking Day. And if you're wondering what Parking Day is a day where people across the globe temporarily repurpose street parking spaces and convert them into tiny parks, sites for public art, play, and design activism. Like seriously, how cool is that? And he is the creator of some of the first parklets in the world. Today, John will be speaking about social infrastructure in the public realm. Are parklets the future of outdoor public spaces in Marin County? Mark has nearly 20 years of Bay Area restaurant management experience. He serves as the CEO, as the Chief Operating Officer for the Palisades Hospitality Group, overseeing more than 20 restaurants and providing leadership for that group's operations, marketing, and IT teams. He's also one of the principals in a new restaurant venture opening this summer in downtown San Antonio. Mark will be addressing paths that restaurant operators are charting as they move into the recovery phase and what role restaurants play in rebuilding the fabric of our communities. Last, but certainly never least, we have Carlos Sanchez. Carlos is a managing director and member of the Piper Sandler Consumer Investment Banking team. He focuses on providing investment banking and merger and acquisition advisory services to restaurant and coffee companies. He has over 15 years of investment banking services and has done more than 90 deals. In 2018, he was named Food and Beverage Banker by The Deal, a transaction information service. Through his work as financial advisor to restaurant companies across the country, Carlos has seen how transformative the pandemic has been to the restaurant sector. He will share insights from the industry research to add to the discussion of how to help restaurants succeed in our communities. So today, each of our panelists is going to offer a brief talk on those topics, and then Shinji is going to lead a roundtable. Now, with that, and without further ado, I take you to our first panelist, John Bela.
Great. Mayor Brian, could you make me the presenter? Oh, no, here we go. All set up. Great. Super. Well, first of all, I want to thank you, Mayor Colbert, for the invitation to be part of this event. And I think it's a rare event for me to be part of a conversation that includes an urban designer, a restaurateur, hospitality leader, and someone from finance. It's a great setup for a conversation. As you alluded to, can y'all hear me okay and see my slides okay? Yeah?
Yeah, absolutely.
As you alluded to, we're I think poised to make a serious move toward economic recovery throughout the country and of course here in Marin County. And I thought this would be an interesting moment to introduce to the conversation the topic of social infrastructure. Well, you may ask, what is social infrastructure? I'm sure you've heard of infrastructure, but what is it? What is social infrastructure? Well, what's a recent book by Eric Kleinenberg, author of a group called Palaces for the People, describes social infrastructure as the physical elements of community that act as a conduit to bring people together to build social capital. And I think that's relevant today, particularly as we're thinking about, as a nation, making trillions of dollars investment in infrastructure, to clarify that infrastructure isn't just roads and bridges. It's not just our water systems and our transportation system. Actually, it's a whole series of physical environments that support our public life in our cities and our communities. So social infrastructure includes civic spaces like parks and playgrounds. It includes, oh, wow. Some of my slides aren't loading here that well. Let's see. It includes libraries. It includes sidewalks, and public transportation. But it really encompasses all places where people can assemble, whether in public space, in streets, courtyards, outdoor markets, etc. So the open streets in San Rafael, for instance, have been a great catalyst for social interaction in our communities, and in particularly during the pandemic, when our traditional venues of gathering have been closed off to us, whether that's our libraries or our parks or other places. These types of social spaces have been critical, I think, to enable us to encounter one another and to socialize and to actually maintain the kind of social fabric of our communities. Critical social infrastructure happens, of course, in public spaces, in our streets, in our parks, in our civic spaces. Social infrastructure also includes private spaces like coffee shops, churches, other places where there's invitation for communities to assemble. Some great examples of smaller types of social infrastructures throughout the county. I want to point out, though, that not all social infrastructure is created equal. And Eric Kleinenberg in his book talks about a couple examples where, when he was taking his kids to school when he lived in a larger city, that the way that the school was designed meant that the parents had to actually get out of their, mode of transportation, whatever it was, and actually encounter one another briefly in that moment of dropping off the kids. And that simple act of encountering one another resulted actually in the formation of friendships, the formation of social bonds, the formation of a broad social network. When Eric talks about when he moved his family to the peninsula in the Bay Area, suddenly this became his drop-off experience. And although it was a top school, very, very well rated and regarded, because of this subtle design change around the invitation or the lack of invitation, actually, to create that moment of social interaction, he found that he didn't form as many social bonds with potentially other members of his community, through that venue of the school. But this applies to libraries, to all sorts of civil spaces, as well as private spaces in our community. Eric Kleinenberg talks about or writes that social infrastructure is at its best when it's accessible to all, regardless of race, language, or ability, or to patronize a local business. I bring this up in the context of the conversation around the future of our outdoor spaces throughout the county. And I ask this question, I'm really asking the question, are parklets the future? And I want to differentiate what's currently happening out in our city streets from what a parklet is. A parklet, by definition, actually is a place that's publicly accessible. So I don't want to pick on anybody here. This is actually a beautifully designed outdoor public space, but I was taken aback actually when I went around the corner and saw, hey, across the street at the Creekside Park, packed with people, tables are packed. Here's a beautiful, very well designed and inviting space, but because of the framework or the approach to this particular space, it was vacant and empty. And I want to point out that I think this is just a missed opportunity in terms of the potential role that these outdoor places can play in our community. There's also examples where, again, I'm not trying to pick on any individual designers, but these actually aren't fulfilling sort of some basic code obligations. So, this is a space in front of a restaurant in Fairfax, and I don't believe that this particular outdoor dining framework is very inviting. It sort of closes off the street. Actually, I think it presents sort of a safety hazard. You can't exactly tell what's happening behind the screens or in between the sidewalk. Furthermore, it's not meeting the basic code requirements of ADA accessibility, of which all parklets, if it's truly a parklet, fundamentally have to be accessible, universally accessible to all, and be flush with the sidewalk. So my point is that, and John King from the San Francisco Chronicle writes about this, don't call them parklets. Parklets are, they have a review process and they're publicly accessible. So I want to differentiate, a potential parklet program from what another alternative is offered out there, which is simply a cafe table and chair permit. And typically, restaurateurs are very, very much aware of the value of utilizing outdoor space, and they'll pay for that space. And there's an annual fee. Now, I know during the pandemic, we've been focused on actually, let's give our restaurateurs a break. They need help. Let's utilize our public realm, our shared social spaces to support our local business. And I totally support that. I do want to point out though, as we think about, moving toward a future, taking advantage of the insight that we've gained from utilizing our outdoor space in this way to perhaps differentiate the idea of commercial outdoor table seating from what people know as a parklet, which is actually a place which is publicly accessible. And, parklets, again, create invitation for creativity, for play. Yes, they can also do a great job of supporting that adjacent business. But more than that, they create and fulfill this very important role, particularly today, as a social gathering place. So even if you're not patronizing a restaurant, you might sit down and meet a neighbor. You might grab a cup of coffee from a local takeout place. And actually, because these are extensions of the sidewalk into the shared parking lane, which is part of our collective public realm, my point of view is that there is a public obligation for these types of space in terms of the role they play in supporting social infrastructure and the kind of social fabric of our communities. I'm gonna end it there.
John, that was great. So easily understood. Thank you so much. Mark, let's turn it over to you. I think you're still on mute, Mark.
There we go. Gosh,
Perfect.
you'd think after 16 months, the unmute would be a reflex at this point, right? So I have a very brief presentation here. If I can. There we go. Great. Do you have my screen at this point?
Yes, we do.
Terrific. Great. Well, thank you. You know, as I was asked to speak a little bit about what role restaurants can play in rebuilding that fabric of our community, which has really been frayed during this pandemic, I felt it was really important to consider what role restaurants play in our communities under normal circumstances. It's far more than providing sustenance or convenience. It's really about experience, and it's really about creating those social gathering places as well. So, you know, and it struck me that it's worth mentioning, you know, as I talk with new team members and managers in the restaurants that I manage, I often find myself citing the origin of the word restaurant, as it really is core to what we do in the restaurant business. Restaurant really drawing its name from this restaurer, which really implies this restoring to a former state, whether it is on a daily basis of enjoying a daily ritual, using as a daily reprieve from all the stresses and challenges of life, or to create a space for people to reconnect and recharge, whether you're celebrating big occasions or small. You know, the restaurant has really played that role in all of our lives, and by and large has become our one of our third places. You know, after home and work, restaurants have long been that third place, or one of those third places, that familiar, comfortable space where we gather with old friends or make new ones, a place where we are known and are made to feel cared for and recharged. And for many of us, restaurants are that big part of what connects us to our community. It's where our various circles overlap over a meal or over coffee, over a family event or post-activity event. It is a place where we do convene, and those interactions, just like what John mentioned with the drop-off and pickup from school, those interactions, whether it is at a host desk waiting to be seated, or passing by a table, running into friends, or making new ones, it does play a real integral part in how we connect and how our community is formed. And during this time, I, for one, and I find many others, have really come to realize just how much we do rely on those interactions, the collection of all those interactions with one another for happiness, and how important the places where we come to interact really are. And when they're removed from our daily routine, and our celebrations are not happening in those places, we come to realize how much is really missing. So it's really no surprise that as those dining rooms were closed, we felt more disconnected and unfulfilled as we were, and now as we're able to return to restaurant patios or outdoor dining rooms, bars, we're really beginning to feel a return to a familiar, to a known place, to that space that has been for our daily ritual and celebrations over the years. And I'm witness to this in the businesses I manage, where people are so excited to dine out again. Even the act of dining out in a restaurant is reason enough to celebrate, it seems. This past Friday night, I was on 4th Street in Santa Fe, right near G Street, and I was struck by the level of activity on the street, and just the people were literally dancing in the street alongside diners who were sitting and dining. So to see that start to come back in a material way as people feel more and more comfortable coming out, it does really underscore the importance of these places, these third places, especially when so many people's second place has been off the table for so long. When home has been your first, second, and third place, even with those that you love and care about, the ability to broaden that circle and interact on the various levels really has been missed. So, in a general way, restaurants, I definitely think do have that role to play, and it's really the same role that we've always played. It's to create the space and the scene where communities can come together and feel restored. And given the gravity of this past year, it won't happen overnight, and the dining experiences may take a while to really start to feel familiar and comfortable again, as operators really work to evolve and adapt to our new environments. And how do we make a new and changed environment feel comfortable and familiar as people reemerge and start coming out again? In how we go about doing that, we stop to kind of consider what are those paths, what are the trends that are forming, and how are restaurants embracing or in some cases leading those shifts. In general, I find that widespread dining trends really develop over a time. They're fads that come and go, but true trends take time to really develop. And in part, I think that's because diners are creatures of habit. And at times it can be difficult for established brands, established operations to really pivot and evolve and adjust for fear of disrupting an already good thing in an attempt to make it a great thing. And many operators are quite slow to evolve and change until they're really forced to do so. It's kind of the nature of operating a business like that. And in an industry that operates, generally on razor thin margins, the risk of a slight fall off in revenue is enough to really slow that evolution. And more often than not, that innovation really comes from the necessity to recapture lost revenue or reduce expenses in an effort to survive. And what I will say is one thing for sure that came of COVID is, it really did give operators license to swiftly adjust and change, if not force them to adjust and change. And some wiser operators were really taking the opportunity to evaluate the operations top to bottom, front to back, and see what are those changes or adjustments that otherwise we might be too hesitant to make for fear of disrupting the momentum, disrupting the flow. Well, the momentum was broken, the flow had stopped, and we were forced to reinvent so many different things. Many of those changes came much more swiftly than we typically would have experienced. We were making decisions that we might have labored over for months and months. We were making, multiple of those, per day. So that opportunity or that necessity really became the opportunity. And whether it's changing something as simple as what might have customarily been complimentary, table bread or chips and salsa or whatever it may be, now becoming a charged item, or the pivot to contactless or cashless payments, or offering a smaller and more dynamic menu instead of a more expansive one, or the very mode in which the guests experience the restaurant. Things have changed with far less friction than I can recall before. So, in trying to identify a handful of those trends that really have caught on or are catching on, or that operators are really focusing on, the first one that comes to mind is really the general dining format. And by no means is a fast casual or a fast fine format something brand new. It didn't, spawn from the pandemic and the interruption in dining over the several years preceding COVID. That fast casual dining, which really strikes the balance of a far more crafted and creative food experience than your average, faster food meal, at a price point and an investment of time that's much lower than a more formal dining experience. That trend had really gotten steam and had continued to grow leading up to COVID. And more diners had really been trading in that formal, traditional, full service dining experience and gravitating to more of that abbreviated mode, which focuses on quality without formality and thoughtfully created food and drinks without the investment of time, that heavy investment of time and forethought to go and dine out. And as fast as that segment was growing pre-COVID, it's picking up even more traction as we emerge. The days of a typical dining experience, and including a 400 bottle wine list and artfully presented food and super precious cocktails and all of those niceties and formalities that we just haven't had the opportunity to experience in so long, have kind of lost a little bit of their value as we've kind of become more accustomed to a little bit more of an abbreviated experience, and even the full service operations had to kind of adjust to that abbreviated mode. And I think what I saw firsthand and what many operators saw was the operations that were already operating in that fast casual mode. It was a far, well, they were already leaner and their food already translated more easily to a takeaway. They were far more able to pivot and adjust to that off-premise dining, to food to go, and a less experience-driven dining outing. And this is, in part, operators enjoy, in good times even, enjoy this as well. It's it tends to lead to higher frequency of dining. It can operate with a lower cost of labor, and it can generally result in a faster turn time, which as an operator, that really is what leads to profitability. And as we are emerging from this, I'm seeing operations that otherwise might have been more full stick service, more full service dining, thinning out a little bit and pivoting to more of a fast casual mode, in part due to the appeal of the efficiencies that they realized over the past year, but candidly in part due to the challenges of hiring staff. I can't recall a time that was more challenging to hire than what we are currently experiencing in this industry. So the little bit more limited staffing and service model really is both desirable by a lot of guests. It's appealing to operators and in some ways a necessity due to staffing challenges that are out there. So I do think that growing trend of fast casual in a more simple restaurant format will continue for the foreseeable future. And regardless of what what style of service the operators are functioning under. Operators are seeking ways to pivot away from the dark days of simply surviving under heavy restrictions to an approach of lighthearted ways to enjoy dining out again. We're seeing this with adjustments in music, in even color schemes, in language on menus, in signage, and really coaching for staff energy levels and attitude, really trying to propagate those good vibes that draw people into places to convene, and that which we've longed for over this past year. And it really is paramount to us feeling normal again, is to have that positive light energy that is really refreshing at this point out there. So if you find yourself in front of an overexcited server or host, take it as a cue to remember that you came out for more than just the meal. You came out for that experience. So try and pay that one forward. I'll briefly just give a couple other notes. One really on technology, and the cloud-based point of sale systems are nothing new, but their market share as compared to those legacy server-based systems really did grow dramatically during the pandemic, as operators strive to create more of that user-friendly digital storefront and to limit their time on the telephone taking orders. Those cloud-based systems were there to quickly allow operators to spin up online ordering and operate more efficiently. And as diners, I think we've all become acutely aware of which restaurants make it easy to order and which ones are more challenging. And you tend to go where it is easier, more fluid for you. We're seeing more and more, whether it's for scalability, mobile payments, online ordering, and the like. A lot of restaurants who really thrived without that online presence and that more dynamic point of sale are now really forced to jump into an arena that they may not have otherwise felt that need. And lastly, and I'll leave it here, is really this off-premise dining in a similar vein of generating more business. The operators who previously might have utilized those third-party delivery platforms in a very minimal way or not at all really jumped into partnership with several delivery platforms. Everyone that you could get into, operators would jump into, and guests really wanted that no contact dining while sheltered in place, and the delivery platforms were really the only practical way to make that happen. And while it was largely necessary and a broad scale for a period of time, a long-term significant real dependence on third-party delivery platforms with their commission-based fee structure is one trend that does concern me. With the all-in commissions ranging from anywhere from 18 to 30+% charged to the restaurant, and delivery fees on the other end of it, and service charges billed to the guest, the operator has very little opportunity for profit margin, while the guest's value perception is diminished. So as an operator, it really is important to recognize the disparate profitability of a sale depending on its origin. And it's been a crutch that operators have had to lean on, but it's one that we really do need to look closely at. Every item cooked has an incremental impact on resources and bandwidth when approaching capacity. And depending on the origin of that order, the varying degrees of profitability for the very same items being produced. So, in other words, a meal ordered through a third party is considerably less flow through than a meal ordered directly through the operator. So, as we do return to more normal dining patterns, where the majority of the revenue is derived from on-premise dining, it does make it is important for the operator to strike that healthy balance of on-premise dining, directly order takeout without commission, And then finally, this to supplement those sales with the third-party business to the extent it doesn't limit one's capacity to fulfill the directly purchased meals. So off-premise dining through the third-party apps experienced this huge surge during the pandemic, and I don't think it's going away anytime soon. That said, it is a trend that we as operators need to evaluate regularly as we continue to recover. So my time is up, but I'll leave you with just a challenge that to get out and dine as often as you feel comfortable with it. And when you can't dine in, order your food directly from the restaurant. But however you enjoy that meal, remember by supporting restaurants, you're doing your part to help rebuild your community. It's interaction by interaction, and supporting those venues, those spaces that are committed to propagating the value of the community and all those interactions. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Excuse me. Thank you, Mark. That was great. I will certainly dine out as often as I can. Carlos, we now turn to you, my friend.
Great. Well, thanks everybody. And Mark, that was even though developed independently, you'll pick up a few common themes in some of the stuff that I have been seeing as well in my work in the finance area, working with restaurant businesses across the country. And through conversations with Brian and some kind of preceding discussions we had, I thought it would be helpful to take a look at what we're seeing at an industry level and what this data is telling us in terms of maybe some ways to help support local operators, local restaurant businesses as we're coming out of the pandemic here. So just a quick kind of recap of where we were. I think everyone knows and appreciates how difficult the past year was for the restaurant industry. But I think as we take a look at some numbers, it was literally an event that nobody could ever see coming. You can kind of see in this graph here, the restaurant industry has been growing significantly over a long, long period of time and has become just a huge part of the economy in many ways. And a huge employer, and a huge supporter of local businesses, and had been really a nice source of steady growth. This growth is driven by a combination of chain restaurants as well as independent restaurants. In particular, as more and more of the community turns to entrepreneurial endeavors like restaurants. Unfortunately, obviously, last year was pretty catastrophic when you look at the amount of sales lost in the restaurant industry, close to 140 billion during this past year, with a lot of that shifting to people buying food at grocery stores and cooking at home, which when you look at the next page here, unfortunately has had a significant impact on the number of restaurants that are out there. This chart here graphs the increase in restaurant count over time per year, and you can see the significant hit in 2020, reversing a trend of had been pretty steady growth. Unfortunately, and what's not necessarily revealed in here, the part of the restaurant industry that took the biggest impact were local and independent restaurants. They didn't have big balance sheets full of cash that could sustain a shock to the system like this. And unfortunately, I think for all of us, our local communities suffered through these closures and have left a void. And so that there's certainly risk that could continue here in 2021, even as we're starting to see a rebound. And even though the federal government in particular has deployed some significant capital to help support local restaurants, there's certainly still many that are at risk. As we look at the next slide here, I think this is as we start to get some encouraging signs that the recovery is in process and a rebound. This is a survey that our research team has been doing really since the pandemic, showing consumer intent to return to restaurants. And at this point, we're back up into the, call it 63% range, which I think headline is positive. However, if the flip side of this is you still have, call it a third of the population that still has concerns about going out to restaurants. And as I think we're all probably aware, the restaurant industry historically is a fairly thin margin industry. It's not an industry that was built to sustain a lot of lost demand, and this type of kind of broader concern still leaves a number of restaurants still vulnerable. And so I think that's part of the backdrop here, is still being aware that even though you do have people excited to dine back out, and restaurant operators excited to have people back in the restaurants, there's still a portion of the population here that has some concern that's likely going to impact their behavior for some reasonable period of time here. The next slide here is we think about kind of looking at how the recovery is making progress. This is a chart really going back to the beginning of the pandemic from data from OpenTable of seated diners. So this is people actually making reservations and showing up and sitting down and eating at restaurants. Obviously making progress from when we were in full shelter in place, and when things kind of slid back around the December timeframe. And latest data says that, hey, we're only down 18% from 2019. If you had told anyone in the restaurant business prior to the pandemic that being down 18% is a victory, they would look at you like you're from another planet. This is a business where being down 2-3% was a huge hit. So we still have a big hole that needs to get filled, and will take time ultimately for these businesses to fully recover. If you think back to the prior page, where you still have a third of the population that has some hesitancy about coming back. So that's, I think, just giving level setting in terms of kind of the backdrop that we're seeing around the broader restaurant industry. Still plenty of proof points that things are making progress, that we're heading in the right direction. That obviously the consumers are showing excitement to return to restaurants. When our research team polls consumers, it's interesting that returning to restaurants ranks up there with going back on vacation and traveling again as one of the top things that consumers are looking forward to doing once restrictions are lifted and the health environment returns. So all positive for the restaurant space. But we're certainly not all the way there yet, and likely, as I think Mark pointed out, the way that consumers access restaurants is likely to have some permanent changes, and so we need to be thoughtful about that and how we can support restaurant operators. The next slide here. This is some interesting data, and it actually serves to Mark's point. Well, what has happened in restaurants, and frankly, you see it in retail as well. You'll hear the term that there's been 10 years of e-commerce adoption that happened in this first 6 months of the pandemic. People that had never ordered delivery from a takeout service before, people that had never ordered ahead via their phone or done curbside, they figured out ways to adopt that in a very short period of time. And what the behavior is showing that they're likely going to continue to do these types of things, and that restaurants now have to pivot their business to be able to accommodate a significant portion of their sales coming in terms of off-premise, pickup, to-go, delivery. We really call it an omni-channel experience, really being able to satisfy consumer demand in many, many different ways, which can create challenges. It can create cost challenges, as Mark indicated. It can create physical challenges. How do you satisfy a whole line of the consumers showing up to dine in at the restaurant, to pick up their food, a DoorDash driver trying to pick up that person's order, all of them coming at the same spot? If you don't have the physical ability to help allocate people to different spots, it can be a challenge for restaurants. So these are some of the things that we're seeing operators have to navigate in this new reality of omni-channel consumers here, and their desire to access restaurants in all kinds of different ways frankly, are kind of a big evolution in a very short period of time. So just, I think kind of key takeaways from our work and observations in the space, it was a very traumatic year in 2020 with really the independent operators that showed particular vulnerability. A lot of it was just lack of access to capital, less abilities to sustain the shock, less ability to raise capital to survive through this. And those that are left standing are certainly not out of the woods because the environment has changed in a meaningful way. I think on the positive note, the research will tell you that the recognition of consumers of the importance of restaurants in their communities, the importance of restaurants in how they live and gathering places and experience has only increased. When they were not able to go out and dine, it really highlighted how much they value it, how much they missed it. And we're starting to see the beginnings of them, come back out in communities, and you're starting to see that vibrancy in particular on weekend nights and all of those things that we all value. It's starting to come back, but it's not fully there. And how restaurants have to operate has also changed. And in particular, the ability to manage sales coming at them in all kinds of different ways in a more complex way. All these things are really requiring restaurant operators to modify it in a big way. And I think what we have seen, in the financial community is that frankly the bigger businesses are handling it better. They can throw more resources at it. They can put more capital behind it. And they're being rewarded with really winning a lot of market share. Their stock values have gone up significantly. And so you definitely are at risk to, some of the bigger, well-capitalized chains taking advantage of the situation and putting more vulnerable local operators at risk. And so I think, at least from my perspective, I think some of the things that, we can all think about are ways to support restaurants at the community level is really thinking about ways to help them, in fundamental things like how do you help them access for takeout and delivery and pickup. I think we see it in shopping malls now where you pull up in front of a store and there's curbside pickup stations pre-allocated. How do you do that in the context of a town? More complicated, but these are things that likely would be pretty additive and helpful to restaurant operators where their consumers are coming at them from many different directions, including ordering ahead and pickup and so forth. And so there's certainly some physical things that maybe we could help with in terms of how these restaurants satisfy all the different customer occasions they have. I think as we think about the 1/3 of the population that still has some concerns about safe dining, I think we have seen that outdoor dining definitely helps, alleviate some concerns around that. So how do we, to John's point, how do we think about, these shared spaces in context of restaurants and outdoor spaces, and how do we think about that become maybe a more permanent part of restaurants in order to help them and help consumers that aren't feeling quite confident yet to go back inside of a physical space again. So these are, I think, things that can be additive, and frankly, this is also back to to some of these larger chains we've seen. They have the capital to go out and build tents and build permanent outdoor seating and expand patios and do all those types of things, and they're spending their own money on it, and they're seeing the benefit in sales. Local operators that may not have either the ability to do that or frankly have the ability to change their spaces the same way without community involvement are certainly suffering as a result. And then I think the last thing is, in terms of kind of helping local restaurants, is what has emerged in particular over the past few months are some substantial federal programs aimed at the restaurant sector, and in particular aimed at local independent restaurants. We all saw headlines about larger chains taking advantage of the first payroll protection program loans. I think what we're seeing now are substantial programs that are really focused on helping local operators, and more of a question, but can we do more things to help these local operators access these types of federal programs, because they can be meaningful lifelines as they continue to navigate these types of challenges. So that was what I had prepared here, Brian, and so hopefully added into the discussion here. But with that, I'll pass it back to you.
Oh, hey, thanks, Carlos, and thanks to all three of you for those presentations. I think it's really great. As John said, you are coming from three very different perspectives, but the ideas and concepts you talked about certainly resonate among all three of you from your various industries and experience, and it's great. So now I'm going to turn it over to Shinji for our roundtable discussion, and I think I would encourage all our participants. I think chat is working to start throwing questions in for the Q&A after the roundtable discussion. Shinji, over to you.
All right, thank you, Mayor Brian. So for this roundtable discussion, what I want to do is kind of go back over the comments that all three of you made, and just kind of have a slightly unstructured discussion centered around four primary questions that we have. So the first question that I want to start on is, of all of the major financial, physical, operational trends that the three of you have identified, that in terms of restaurants adapting to COVID, which of those trends do you see have a long-term viability? And when we say long-term viability, we're talking about more, we'll say, semi to fully permanent changes in how restaurants essentially handle things or behave.
I'll kick it off. You guys are the experts in the industry, but from a kind of public space perspective, I can say that the Parklet program started in San Francisco in 2010, and prior to COVID, there was I think about 70 parklets that ended up being created in the context of the Parklet program. So this is city issues a permit, project sponsor, restaurant, gallery, whatever, builds it, maintains it, and can utilize it for outdoor dining, also serves the public. It's demonstrated that the way we think about how we use our public right of way, in particular how we value parking in the context of dense, compact, walkable areas like downtown San Rafael, downtown San Anselmo, it's really changed the equation, I think, in terms of how we value the role of those street parking spaces, because I think many businesses have recognized that, yes, a single patron can park in front of, if I have a parking space in front of my business or gallery, single patron's there for an hour, 2 hours, I get one customer. In the context of some sort of outdoor dining or a parklet, I can get 10, 15, 20 customers in that same hour. And so the value proposition has really been borne out in terms of really thinking carefully about the role that our streets and our public realm sidewalks can do in terms of supporting outdoor dining, and then resulting in the outcome that Carlos and Mark referred to. It's the vibrancy, it's the life. It's like we really want to see people in our streets, in our communities. Totally agree, restaurants have a critical role to play. And that outdoor public spaces, particularly if it's in the parklet format, has been proven to be a model that's successful. And so that seems like eyes are opened, I think, in the county about this possibility, right? And let's take advantage of it.
John, I would agree on that front. I think that use of and really how we look at those outdoor spaces and that public area really is key to even without spacing and distancing restrictions, which will eventually largely pass. Just that vibrancy that it does bring to the community, that connection between the restaurant and retail and service, and how they can all really participate, as opposed to as you mentioned, that what's the yield out of that one parking spot, and really obviously hurdles to get over, because it really hasn't been a big part of the culture in so many of those blocks, those neighborhoods. And there's naturally going to be resistance from from those that it may not obviously benefit right out of the gates. So it's really figuring out what is that model, what are the different nuances on that model to get the buy-in from all the stakeholders, so that the stakeholder that we're all looking for, being the shopper, the diner, is drawn to that vibrancy, to that interaction that exists when the activity comes out front and out into those spaces. So I would largely, yeah, I would agree on that front as well.
Yeah, the only thing I'd add is I think just the broader theme that we're seeing, and this is restaurant, this is retail, it's really consumer behavior more broadly, is an openness to accessing restaurants in all kinds of different ways that they had never, I think there used to be if I wanted takeout, I would go to or if I wanted delivery, I'd order from pizza, or if I wanted to dine in, I went in and dined in and I sat inside of a restaurant. I think that, the openness to all kinds of different experiences, I think, is going to be permanent, and the desire to and to access restaurants, interact with restaurants in all kinds of different ways is here to stay. And I think that's what I think many operators are pivoting to and adjusting to. And it's not the smoothest, but it can open up all kinds of new opportunities for them.
So in line with that, with this sense of more permanent shifts in consumer behaviors, what are we seeing then for those restaurants that are slower to adopt to some of those, or adapt to some of those changes? Do you see a path forward for those restaurants? Do you see a path forward for sort of more traditional, quote unquote, traditional style of dining, or is it more of like a complete paradigm shift where it's essentially a new hurdle that we need to move in terms of being able to support these customer preferences?
I think it's a little bit of kind of, frankly, concept by concept. I think there still be a role in the community for traditional fine dining. You have the type of sit down experience, certainly elevated type of experience. There certainly will still be demand for that. And I think in particular, as capacity restrictions are eased and consumer confidence comes back, there'll be a role for that. I think it's really for concepts where, frankly, the food travels well. People are open to use it in a lot of different ways. It's those types of businesses which, frankly, I think make up most local restaurants, where there's going to need to be more flexibility in how they traditionally handled it, and relying on 90-95% of their sales from a indoor dining room is probably not going to be the best strategy. They're going to need to figure out different ways to be flexible and meet the consumer in different ways than they have maybe in the past.
Agreed. Even in the in that more fast casual format, when the sales were derived by and large from on-premise dining, that shifted. For several months it was flipped on end completely, rather than say 90% of the business being on premise and at most 10 being off. It flipped completely, and it is gradually coming back in the full service finer dining environments. I agree. There's definitely a place for those, and we still really do have occasion for that. But I think that we as consumers have built some habits and have found ways to enjoy that restaurant experience without dining in. So to answer your question, I mean, what does it mean for those that don't adapt? I do think there'll be varying degrees of to what extent they need to adopt, as Carlos said, to really meet the consumer where they are. The rules have changed and will continue to change as people's comfort level, as that 37% that are uncomfortable in dining out, as that shrinks and more people become comfortable dining out. It doesn't necessarily mean that they will dine out. They still have patterns formed of ordering in and taking out. They've proven that they can enjoy great food sitting, in a park, or bringing it into home. So we don't know how those habits are going to shake out, but I think intuitively we have to assume that the proportion of dine-in experiences versus dine out pre-COVID and post-COVID, will be different.
So one other question there is, from the standpoint of seeing these more permanent shifts in customer behavior, what do you think about the infrastructure that's going to be necessary to support these new behaviors? We've seen some COVID adaptations. Some of those are adaptations that have already sort of originated well before COVID actually happened. What are some of the additional, both sort of social, whatever financial infrastructure that's necessary, as well as city-based policies that can be supportive of that infrastructure developing that will be necessary to kind of enhance and support the trends that we're seeing?
Maybe I'll try to take that one and then we can build on it. So and I see there's a question in the chat too about this tension between the outdoor public spaces for people, supporting our F&B restaurants, and then also retailers who maybe aren't seeing the benefit. I think it's a really key consideration. And I want to introduce the notion of parking management. Actually, it's like, just like, I think the parklet program around globally actually has demonstrated the value of that space right on the street is so much more valuable in many cases to that adjacent business than storing a car there. But what it also means is that from the city municipal side, town side, town's got to be smart about how and where they manage. I mean, where people do park. A lot of us are going to continue to drive. We're going to continue to do takeout, pickup, and deliveries. And so key to making the investments, I think, in the public spaces that support the vibrancy that we're all after is also making that investment and thinking carefully about how we manage parking. So, if just briefly, I want to mention Donald Shoup. I don't know if you've heard of this guy. He's a UCLA professor. They call him Shoup Dog. He wrote a 500-page book called The High Cost of Free Parking. It's a big, thick tome, but I can break it down into 3 simple ideas. Number 1, remove off-street parking requirements. This is about how you catalyze reinvestment in your downtowns. If you got to build all this parking, it's really difficult to develop these smaller lots. That's not so relevant here. Second key, though, is charging appropriately for parking. It's like everywhere else in the world, the outdoor public space, our street space is a valuable resource. We have to charge appropriately for it. And then what a lot of towns and cities do is take that parking revenue and put it back into the public realm, create spaces for retailers, create a parklet in front of a youth center, use that revenue from carefully managing this shared resource of our parking spaces in the street to do something great for the public realm, to support our local businesses and those who maybe don't have the financial wherewithal to build their own setup. A lot of what the effort in San Francisco has been over the last several years is about geographic equity. How do we ensure that those less well-to-do neighborhoods, those less well-to-do businesses are able to take advantage of these types of programs? About using those city resources where possible to make up that gap in terms of opportunity that these types of programs present.
What are some additional thoughts, Mark, from like an operator perspective on like what restaurants, particularly restaurants that don't have the cash reserves, might do or might need from cities in order to be able to successfully make this transition?
Well, without the ability to directly expand one's own space, the premise of either some sort of centralized access. Carlos referenced the premise of these easy access or central access for pickup and takeaway, to gain more yield out of that one space instead of let's say a car being parked for 90 minutes. It might be 60 cars parked there over 90 minutes, or whatever it may be for that pickup, to really expand that reach, which would have far more value to not just a particular restaurant, but those that are within striking range of that centralized spot, which then creates that as being a destination or a spot where I'm going to dine from there. I may not know precisely which outlet I'm going to dine from, but I know that is an area that that has put the thought and a facility into facilitating that that sale. I do like what is happening, even in the ways that that we see it in the new park in downtown San Anselmo, where it's not all pizza that people are dining out there. People are bringing food from various restaurants. They're grabbing coffee. They're bringing food from home. They're gathering up with places, and the premise of that, again, meeting people where they are. The idea of a larger footprint communal place to gather and enjoy the food, drink, entertainment that comes from those restaurants, or even components of retail being incorporated in that. Let retail come to coming to where those diners are. I don't know exactly how that shakes out in the long term, but I'm definitely intrigued by the community that I do see forming there. If you back up, on any evening, and see where the energy is on the block, it's largely focused there, where people can go and take advantage of that space, however they're choosing to do it, with less friction, less restrictions. It really does lend to that sense of community.
And do you mind if I just jump in for one quick second? And I just want to say, Mark, I really appreciate the last comment you made, because I think in Marin it is so hard to actually define what does equity mean, right? And very often it's for a shortcut for a problem that's ill-defined. And one of the things that when the community came together to create that space was, let's make it an equity play. And so if you just simply have the means to go and support a restaurant, that's great. But if you don't have the means and simply want to make a simple sandwich at home and yet come outside and be in the midst of your community, come down and enjoy that public space. And I'm just really glad to hear that you've noticed that. And it really wants me to go back to the community to keep working and building on that space. Sorry to jump in there, Shinji.
Yeah, I would say it's definitely palpable. I mean, it is. You can really see the various families and individuals coming together. And like I said, it's not one restaurant's dining room. It's the communities. So that is exciting to see.
Now, from a financial standpoint, how does this sort of, if that is the trajectory that we're looking at in terms of sort of the eating space becoming more communal as people kind of leverage more parklets and things like that, how does that impact from an investor perspective, the sort of like the way in which this investment is looking at in terms of like supporting that new infrastructure? Are we waiting for cities to kind of provide the groundwork first, or is this something that those that are investing in restaurants are actually also looking at putting it as part of sort of like the bottom line, or the ROI is contributing to this whole communal aspect?
Yeah, maybe just a thought there. I'd say it's a tricky topic. I think as John was sharing some views of different parklets, I think for an operator, it's a it's a tough one because if they have to bear the full investment cost of a space, I think it's easy for them, and frankly probably right for them, to assume that that investment space should benefit their business primarily, if not all. And it's not an investment in a community space. I think that's that. And look, I think we're all in kind of new ground here, but that is, it's difficult, I think, for somebody to frankly finance and pay for a parklet and then have the community expect that to be just for the full benefit of the community versus it's serving primarily that establishment. And I think those are the kinds of things with respect to community spaces versus a space that's just for a particular business. I think that balance is something that I think we're probably all still working to find, and how it's ultimately funded, and whether it's a joint funding, whether it's the community funding, whether it's a business. I think it really probably depends on the space, but it's something I think we have to be mindful of, because it would be a big burden to ask the businesses to finance just the community space without at least being able to put their use as the primary use. And so I think that's a balance, frankly, that I think people are still trying to figure out.
Yeah,
I think that's a great point. And when you first raised the question, Shingy, one thing that I'm aware of just in the work that I've been doing as a volunteer to support the little downtown of Fairfax where I live, is that I think a lot of the restaurateurs, they want the certainty, right? If you've got, hey, I got a month where I can put out cafe tables and chairs. Now it's 2 months. Now it's 3 months. I think the thing that a more structured program can offer is the certainty to the restaurants, so they can make that investment and know that, yes, it's going to benefit my business. Whatever the community, the county, or individual cities decide is the right level of public versus private, support for those spaces, at least the restaurateurs have a certainty. And the way that it's borne out, in many other cities is that, once there's that structure in place, the project sponsor, the restaurant, can build the space and know that, yes, I got this for a year, annually renewable permit. It actually costs me less than a typical cafe table and chair permit, which is also a pretty well-established structure, because there's a quid pro quo, because I'm going to be giving something back when my restaurant isn't fully occupying that space in the mornings, let's say, or after hours. Someone can come and have a cup of coffee, and you know what? That hasn't really negatively impacted my business, but it's been operating in the spirit of, the sidewalk, the streets, the parking is actually a shared resource, and it's for the public. And so, when you talk about privatizing spaces, which I think is what has happened over the last year of necessity, and I totally think it's been critical actually to support our local businesses. But now I think we've got to take a closer look at what is the right role in terms of public-private in those spaces. And I think many cities have shown, many towns have shown that it's worth the quid pro quo for the restaurants. If the restaurants get the certainty, cool, I got an annual permit, I'm going to make an investment here. It usually has paid off in terms of attracting people to that place. You see people out in front of the store, in front of the market, in front of the gallery, whatever it is, it draws other people. And if someone is sitting there grabbing a cup of takeout coffee, having a conversation with a friend, that doesn't actually detract so much. And this is what's been, there's good research and evidence here from the parklet programs that started in San Francisco 10 years ago, now are a global phenomena, that this recipe works. It is a little micro public-private partnership. And, the town, the municipality has the lever to say, hey, if you don't design it right, if you don't maintain it, we're going to revoke the permit. The project sponsor, restaurateur, whatever, says, I'm going to design and build. I know it's going to benefit my business, and I'm giving something back to my neighborhood, to my community. And it becomes an act of generosity as well as supporting my individual commercial venture.
Yeah. John, I do think you nailed that in this. Well, Carlos, you mentioned that if you had built out that a particular space, had I built that out, I would most definitely have a hard time with not being able to utilize it for my patrons. I would have underwritten that which others hadn't made, and that's where there's that conflict, that friction between get something up and running now, because there needs to be something, as opposed to waiting and establishing the guidelines to really make it comprehensive and a long-term look. And it was the right thing to get it out there. And I also think it's the right thing for one to feel protective of that space until we figure out a comprehensive way to really allow it to have that, that crossover. It's a public space being privatized. Is it an absolute? Is there a way that, much like a new development might have a requirement for the parking garage to be open after 6 o'clock to the public, but private during business hours? Is there some sort of framework that can be established to get greater buy-in from more participants, so that spaces are occupied in a productive way, in a equitable fashion that's relative to the investment that was made, either publicly or by those individuals.
So given the trends that we've identified here, what are your thoughts around, so we're just under halfway through 2021 right now. We may not have the full data yet in terms of, are we continuing the upward trends from last year at the same rate? But given where we are this year and what time is left in 2021, what are your thoughts around the moves that cities can make in the remaining 6-7 months that we have in this year to kind of help guide the financial trends, the behavioral trends in a positive direction for both the restaurants as well as communities? And what are some of the specific things that you would expect cities to do within that? And what are some of the things that you would expect the restaurants themselves or their investors to be able to do to help guide those?
On the city front, I do think to the last point we just made, I do think there needs to be a deliberate effort to really figure out how are those spaces used, and to the point of certainty. I firsthand am debating how deep do we go on that development of an outdoor space right now, not knowing for how long there will be a return on that. And I think that hesitance is based on what will that return be, for how long will it be? Those are investor questions, but as an operator, that is one part of how the business will be successful, and whether, to whatever extent that is a part of it, really informs the approach and the investment on other parts of the business. So I do think that does need to be a deliberate focus to really figure out how does it get, how does the use of those public spaces really become sustainable for more stakeholders, because I do think that will inform a lot of other decisions on how we go forward.
I can continue my rant about this, but I don't want to hog the conversation. So, Carlos, do you have any thoughts on what's important for the next 6 months in terms of what can the municipality provide? What might we expect financial services to provide, and the restaurateurs themselves to provide in terms of the path forward?
Yeah, look, I think what the data tells us is that off-premise sales in all kinds of different forms, pickup, delivery, you name it, are becoming a bigger and bigger part of the restaurant business for any type of restaurant. And so, I would say that if we're looking at a kind of purely suburban retail center type of establishments, what you will see, in particular in other parts of the country, is reconfiguring physical spaces to make it as easy as possible for these operators to satisfy that, with dedicated parking spots, with different entrances for delivery drivers and different entrances for pickup. all of that is getting, kind of deployed real time to make that part of the business as easy to operate as possible and as profitable as possible. And so I think as we think about, at a local level, and in particular in downtown settings, how do we try to level the playing field as best as we can for operators to be able to handle demand coming at them that way, and to make it as easy as we can on consumers trying to, find parking for a pickup order, or for a DoorDash driver trying to pop in quickly to make a delivery. Those are some of the things that I think we should be looking at closely, and determine if there's financial dollars that need to go behind it, and who's responsible for that, operators. And if it's the operators, then how do we make it easier from a permitting standpoint, a physical change standpoint at their location, if those are the types of things that are required. So I think that what we are seeing on a national level is that the consumer demand for off-premise occasions is really increasing. And so that is going to be, I think, kind of a permanent part of the restaurant business, even more so than it already was. And we need to be thoughtful about how we help operators satisfy that locally.
Yeah, I think the point you've been raising about, the different ways of accessing restaurants is probably here to stay. I think that's just great insight, and so important in terms of how we think about designing these offsite or shared outdoor spaces, and that needs to be incorporated into any thinking about, maybe a future pathway for shared spaces or parklets. That you have to be able to accommodate pick up and take out, and then I think on the flip side, curb management is really crucial part of this, and we did some work down in San Mateo when we did open street program. They used the parking space, the parking lots that were behind their kind of vibrant retail street, and they dedicated spaces there for pickup and drop off. Similarly with in Fairfax, actually, we the city council and the mayor moved forward with converting some of our existing spaces in the downtown to 10-minute, so it was really suitable for pickup and drop off and loading, and then we could utilize the other spaces to support local businesses. When Mayor Colbert first reached out about this, and Sheeny first reached out, one of the things that I wanted to put out there as a suggestion that might be useful at the county level is for the County Marin to introduce some sort of framework for a parklet program, a pilot parklet program. What I think that could really do is enable each individual city and town in the county to avoid the brain damage of trying to create their own ordinance, right? So if the county introduces a framework, it means that it sort of lowers the barrier for some cities and towns with more or less capacity to create this framework again for this little mini public-private partnership. And there's a great model actually from, I know it's a very, very different scale, but the Metro Nashville County has said, cool, we're going to pivot from our temporary COVID outdoor dining to do a pilot parklet program. We're going to test this out, and we're going to create a countywide framework. It's just a 3-page ordinance that then really creates a framework for the next step. And I think the critical things we've talked about is the businesses need the certainty. I'm not going to invest in, cafe tables and chairs, whatever it is, unless I know I'm there for at least a year. Businesses need the certainty. On the other hand, the public deserves and needs design quality. We got to have some design standards. Like this is it's obscure obstructions in the right of way, tripping hazards. We can't. These are some basic things that I think we got to take a hard look at. And to me, if at a county level we could address that by introducing some sort of pilot parklet ordinance, I really think that could go a long way to taking advantage of the insight we've gained over this last year about, wow, we can really think about how we use our outdoor spaces, particularly in our downtown walkable streets, of which there's precious, they're precious spaces in the county where you can actually get out of your car and walk and have that experience of bumping into a neighbor and really feel that kind of urban vitality even in a small town, they're precious spaces. We got to take advantage of them. I think we've all learned through the pandemic response what an opportunity this is. And my suggestion to kind of carry it forward, provide the restaurant certainty on the municipal side, provide the structure to allow something like this to move forward, which has a proven benefit both for those local businesses and for creating vibrancy and social infrastructure in the public realm.
Yeah, these are good thoughts. These are very helpful. What I want to also do is give attendees now an opportunity to ask some questions. Mayor Brian, do you want to run the Q&A, or do you want me to just?
Yeah, no, first of all, Cindy, that was great. How you sort of kept it organically flowing, and thanks to our panelists. So we have a bunch of questions, some of which Shinji skillfully wove into the roundtable. Thank you for that. So I've got one discrete question, and then I've got the 800-pound gorilla. So let's take the tiny one. And I'm gonna direct this to you, Carlos, but I'll be happy, obviously, to get feedback from our other two panelists. Any idea what proportion of future restaurant sales will permanently shift to the suburbs and away from central cities due to remote work post-pandemic? Because there's any number of policy, restaurant, all things would flow from that. Any sense of that? And obviously, happy to hear from John and Mark on that.
Yeah, look, great question. It's literally the kind of multi-billion-dollar question in the industry right now. We just finished helping a Manhattan-based business raise capital, and had been a thriving business that previously, kind of pre-pandemic did phenomenal. But all of its business was linked to people in office towers, in particular young professionals in office towers. And its sales were down 60% last year, and there's no data that will tell you when people are coming back, at what levels they're coming back, how many days they're going to come back. We're definitely in the kind of have to wait and see mode. I think there's two camps. One is belief that the shift is permanent, and that they're big urban spaces are going to be meaningfully impaired and shrunk for some period of time. On the flip side, we hear as many strong voices that cities like New York and San Francisco and will continue to be great cities. It may take some time, and in particular, you're hearing that around San Francisco, it may take some time for it to get back to where it was in terms of density and people living there and people working there. So it's just too early to know. I think what we are hearing and seeing is that there is a real shift in terms of how people will work. And that includes, number of days that they will be, in an office tower, if you will, in a big city. But what does that mean in terms of demand and where it sits and where people live and how they behave and where they spend their money? I think it's still too early to know. And there's still a lot of speculation about it, just given, how in particular New York and San Francisco, how early it is in the office environment recovery. So big picture questions that I wish I had better answers for, but we're just not seeing conclusive data either way just yet.
Thanks, Carlos. John, Mark, did you want to weigh in on that?
Well, that's the $1 trillion question, I would say, and yet I think we're seeing that major employers are making a bet on cities in terms of continuing to acquire downtown commercial real estate, anticipating that, hey, for some types of our work, particularly the kind of, and this is my understanding of our conversations over the last couple of months, particularly that kind of upfront collaborative creative work, there's no replacement for actually being in person and that time. The face time is actually crucial, and so I think long term we're going to see a return to that, and an acknowledgement of the necessity of in-person work for certain types of work. Maybe for other types of work, when the path is clear, when it's about focused effort, it's likely that may continue at home, and there may be more flexibility long term. I think the kind of implication, in terms of ground floor vibrancy, public realm commerce in these places is there's two dimensions. One is that yes, maybe there's less demand for commerce built into the inside of our commercial towers, and we have to rely more on what's happening out in the public realm. And maybe there's it's smaller amount of retail space. I think there's an interesting comparison in terms of the square feet of retail space in countries around the world. I think the US has like 11 square feet per person. I think France has like 4 square feet per person. So, we have an abundance of kind of ground floor retail space. Maybe we've over-indexed on it to some degree. But I think in terms of the counterpoint is that if more folks are spending more time at home or in their neighborhoods, what does that mean for neighborhood serving retail? I think it's really interesting. Maybe there is a role for mixed use ground floors that support co-working, but also potentially support services for more people who are staying in their neighborhoods. And so I think could be an interesting opportunity or a counterpoint to drawing some of the vibrancy out of the city center. Maybe it's partially replaced in neighborhood serving retail establishments, but just, I think long-term, it seems like, seems like most major industries are continuing to bet on the value of meeting in person, the value of collaborative work, at least for the foreseeable future.
Mark, any thoughts on this one?
Only that I'm, experienced a fair amount. The great majority of the restaurants that I manage are either in suburban or in pockets that have a good mix of residential already there. The two that are in environments that are largely dependent on people reporting to offices on a daily basis, they are trailing, remark on the gap between their recovery and that of the balance is enormous. And they are, that said, they are starting to recover, but it is very, very gradual. And we are most definitely waiting to see how that how that develops. And even once they have a green light to return to office, with what frequency is it going to be? Is it going to be 5 days a week? Is it going to be 3? Is it going to be 1? Will it be by function? What will that really be? So we're most definitely waiting and seeing. And on the flip side of that, yes, what does that mean for our communities like San Rafael and San Anselmo and many other suburban people are starting and ending their day in their same community rather than crossing a bridge or going into a city center. And what does that mean for our adjustments and opportunities? I don't have any answer on that so much as waiting and looking and listening. So,
well, thanks. So here's the question that so many of us have been pondering and have had to deal with, certainly from a policy level. And so I'm going to start with you, Mark, since you went last, and I'm distilling a bunch. There has been, rightfully so, a focus on restaurants during the pandemic. And earlier on during my opening remarks, we are going to, one of these symposiums, we're going to address the cannibalization of brick and mortar retails. But can you touch upon the tension between retail and restaurants right now? Because there is a thought among some, not necessarily all of our, smaller retailers, that they are, this is a zero-sum game, and they are losing with the focus on restaurants, which encompasses many things. One, the sort of community focus on them, parklets, and street closures. So that's a pretty broad topic, and I'll just turn it over to the three of you to your perspectives. Let's lead off with Mark.
Sure. Yeah, no magic answer on that one. I can't say that I'm surprised by the notion that friction is likely there until there is kind of a critical mass of buy-in into how can they coexist and complement each other. I don't think that we can go from no plan to a cohesive or symbiotic relationship between restaurant goer or restaurants and retail, where you might be waiting for a table and make a purchase at a neighboring store, or come in to dine and stroll around and find another service provider. So I don't know that there's no surprise in that. I do and sympathize with and understand that erosion of the brick and mortar retail business through, as a product of the online, online purchasing, and as a result, so many of those stores have, and I don't claim to be any sort of expert by any means there, but clearly that pivoting to digital storefront to supplement their primary business in a similar way that restaurants have pivoted to off-premise. There's a necessity to pivot, adjust, evolve, and meet the consumers where they are. How we do it on the street, how we do it in the neighborhood, really, I do think relies on a common vision of what the end game really looks like, and buy into partnership on how can we get there together. It shouldn't come at the expense of one segment or another. It's really got to be in partnership, understanding that I am a believer, if we do it right, all boats will rise with the tide. But it won't happen by accident. So
Thank you. John?
Yeah, I think it's really supporting our local retailers is something that really needs to be addressed. I think in this kind of coming 3-6 months, whatever next phase we pivot from where we're at today. I think part of it is that the formula for food and beverage outdoor dining is pretty established. You could put out some tables, chairs, and umbrellas. Like, cool, I have dining space. It's less clear for a retailer. Do I need bookshelves? Do I need racks? Do I need someone out there to mind the racks while they're outside? So it's not as quick of a fix. We've been my firm's been doing some work on the 3rd Street Promenade in Santa Monica, also struggling with the kind of broader trends about brick and mortar retail. But one thing that's clear is that people who are coming out to shop today, they're not just looking for the transaction. If they want the transaction, they'll just order online. They're actually looking for an experience. And whether that experience happens, in the store or is supported by a lively public realm, that's actually becoming the kind of key for ensuring, and I think the vibrancy of some spaces where you are seeing continued kind of investment in retail, in ground floor leases, is that where you've got a vibrant public realm, it seems like that's kind of the key to drawing people out. And so I guess I would suggest, for the county, for Santa Fe, for these cities, to let's experiment with doing some types of spaces, maybe some social eddy spaces, as we might call them, that are actually really oriented towards supporting local retailers. I mean, I know it's been key, the fabric of these small towns is this really the nuance, the texture, the locally owned businesses, and we got to support them all. Again, I think it's been easier. The formula is a little bit more well understood for restaurants, but I really think we got to make a move to support some small retailers. First of all, in terms of the parklets, like, don't block the entrance to a retailer. Let's create some kind of retail merchandising plan in the public realm, outdoor and public space. I think could be an interesting thing to explore. And hopefully we do pick up on that spillover effect, that Mark is referring to, that, hey, if you've got 1,000 people, in the street, walking down the street in an hour to go to a restaurant, hopefully they're going to stop and look in my shop and buy something. That's the best outcome we can hope for, to have that kind of spillover effect from the restaurants that then spills over to our local retailers. But again, got to have some space, where they're as visible and present in the public realm, in the street, or at least visible from the sidewalk, as the restaurants are. And I think it ties back to how you accommodate, for parking management, curb management in an intelligent way. Strong role for the towns and cities there to do that.
I think the only thing I'd add is that, as we travel around the country and work with, companies really on a national level, where we see the best performances in areas or centers where you really do have kind of the symbiotic relationship between retail, services, restaurants. Like, that's what's really drawing people. It's, to John's point, in search of experiences that can't be replicated with an online transaction. And so, hopefully it is not a zero-sum game. It's actually, the pie can grow through kind of the collective benefit of everyone involved. And so I do think that, that's to the benefit of the restaurants, to the retailers, creating that type of, downtown experience or neighborhood experience that consumers value should keep drawing more traffic. And so, hopefully those are things that can be addressed, but do need to be addressed as we're kind of rethinking all of, how all this stuff operates in this new reality.
Thanks to all three of you. So I'm again trying to distill some of the questions that we've gotten in the chat. And so we've heard a lot of interesting ideas, right? Like help retailers, help restaurants. Where is it gonna, as a policymaker, I'm trying to figure out, how do we pay for this in the public-private realm, right? Like, because, you hear understandably from, our local retailers, our local restaurants, they obviously, they don't have huge margins to begin with. They've obviously taken a financial hit, even though, whatever's going on with the economy in terms of recovery. Any thoughts on that? Because that's what I wrestle with, and I know my fellow policymakers wrestle with. Are there any ways to sort of figure out, how to fund something like a social space for retail? When, John, earlier on, you spoke about, and Carlos and Mark, you both touched upon the idea that, look, these parklets were primarily built for the restaurants. It all makes sense, right? They pay the costs themselves, for certainty. What's the ROI? Generally, people like to get paid when an asset transfers from themselves to a public good. Any thoughts on that? That would, that's something that, would really help us believe as policymakers to sort of execute some of these ideas and vision.
Maybe I'll just start and then hand it over to Carlos and Mark. Sorry to hog the mic here, but I do want to go back to Donald Shoup. Again, it's like, I don't know how many towns in the county are managing outdoor space and the parking lane appropriately. It comes back to pricing things appropriately, whether that's charging for parking and using that parking revenue to invest in public realm assets to support the shared space, to support social eddies for retailers. That'd be a great thing to pilot or test. So I think that's one potential source of revenue, is thinking about how we manage parking in the county and whether or not there's a capability of directing some of that revenue to fund some of the public realm improvements that I think will again hopefully enable all boats to rise.
Carlos, Mark, any thoughts on this one? This is a tough one.
Yeah, I can't say I'm equipped to know how to answer the public funding question. I mean, I do look at it as there's kind of maybe two buckets of kind of policy change. One is maybe just mindset and ease of use for operators, and figuring out ways to maybe knock down barriers, whether it's speed permitting, just being more friendly on these types of things that we've been talking about, just because of, I think, recognition of how important it is to the success of these local businesses. So that's one camp, which I would argue is probably, low cost or maybe even no cost. So it's purely policy. And then the other is truly, investing in the community with real dollars. Harder for me to understand like where that comes from and how it can be done. And, probably a bigger topic for a separate discussion. But I do think there are two buckets in terms of changes that can be made here and maybe ways to think about them. And they're not all just dollars.
Thanks. Mark, any thoughts?
Not necessarily from a funding standpoint, but the topic of parking and paid or not paid, and how much of it is paid, and how much of it is designated for particular use. Either by time limit or by what the purpose is. I do think that all that does factor in. The last thing that a retailer or service provider or restaurant wants is a reputation for the neighborhood as being, oh, it's impossible to park, or to dissuade patrons from coming down there because they have to pay there, but they wouldn't have to pay anywhere else. So really striking that balance between the use of space and trying to change behavior to suit the overall neighborhood, and just nature does tell me that it's that one area to really look at is, you want to change your behavior, you need to impose something that is going to incentivize people to behave in a little bit of a different way, whether it is, I'll meet you for dinner, let's drop down there and come in 4 different cars, or hey, let's get together for dinner, let's take 1 car, I'll pick you up, those kinds of things are not absolute. It would have to really take a bigger plan by folks that are far more experienced in it than I. But as an operator, I recognize that you can't have it both ways. You can't have with the finite resource of parking, there have to be decisions made in order to accomplish as much as many of the objectives in as complete a way as possible. And as the way people consume changes, I do think that we need a dynamic plan for that as well. Will we see the number of DoorDash drivers coming in for forever? Is it do we need a long-term solution? And to what extent do we need that? If we have this, as I keep going back to that the new park in San Anselmo, is there in a forum like that, in a format like that, is there a means for retail to have a presence? Is there a way for that to be an introduction to retailers that, as many times people have driven down or walked down the avenue or gone to a restaurant, maybe they've never ducked their head in the door, well, maybe bring the door to them where they are. I don't know that I have the answers for that, but I do think that it can't, the solution can't be only serving a single segment of the businesses. To Carlos's point, the live, work, play, or the dining, retail, and service provider, they have to work in concert in order for it to really be sustainable and vibrant.
It's really great points. And just one more thought about source of funding. So, one of the ways that some of the cities, towns we work with have gotten funding for this kind of stuff says, oh, we've got a repaving budget. We've got we're planning to repave 4th Street in 2023. It's going to cost us X millions of dollars. We can put the street back the way we have it today, or we can use this opportunity to redesign. We know we need to redo the paving anyway. We're going to spend, millions of dollars. Let's rethink the role of that space, and maybe, rethink the role of curb management, do some temporary, short-term parking, some park with some other things that can, kind of leverage that forthcoming investment in a way that's more intelligent and more aligned with where you want to head as a city or town. Second one is, I don't know how big they are in the county, but the role of the business improvement associations and business improvement districts, small assessment district. Sometimes there's a city match, but And I know our small businesses are struggling, but a lot of business associations have decided that we're going to do a small assessment, and we're going to do something that benefits us all, whether it's a signage strategy or social eddies for retailers or whatever it is. But that's another model that I think many other towns are using to kind of do again public-private partnership and the municipality again supporting the role of the local business community in doing something that is mutually beneficial.
Well, thanks. Well, look, we are almost out of time. So I'm going to turn to each one of you one last time and see if you have any one big idea or one takeaway that you want to leave. And if not, no pressure. Let's start. Let's see. We led off with John and we ended with Carlos. So Carlos, you get to offer your big idea first or last takeaway.
No pressure, right? I think one of the things that I at least personally value about living in a hamlet like San Anselmo is the sense of community, and so I do think this is it's a great step in terms of having a collective view and towards making it better for all the entrepreneurs that run businesses in our town. And so I think, look, the big idea is to continue to work collaboratively towards this and apply everything we can from thoughts to dollars, and really continue to support local. And hopefully, as we're seeing in other parts of the economy, what comes out of this pandemic are new business models, stronger business models, more resilient people, and we can apply the same to our own town here. So I wish I had a one big magic bullet, but it feels like it's at least from my standpoint, it's collective effort that's gonna help us here.
Thank you, Carlos. Mark?
Well, Carlos, I was hoping you would have the silver bullet because I don't. I sure don't. I think if anything, the premise that our behaviors have changed over this past year, and that which we took for granted as the way our consumers behave, and it might shift in small degrees, little by little, but nothing large and sweeping. As we really are emerging from this, I do think that we need to revisit topics frequently, because it is dynamic, and none of us have really been through this. I don't know how many times in this past year I've heard unprecedented as a word, which I'm not sure what's left at this point that couldn't be described that way. But we haven't been through this recovery yet, and I really do think that as rapidly as things changed for us in this past year, I do think we need to frequently look at these solutions and make sure that that the decisions we're making are addressing not just where we were, but the trajectory we're on right now, because it is dynamic, it is changing. And I appreciate the opportunity to be a part of this and hear from all of you.
Thank you, Mark. John?
Can I share screen for a quick second? Here we go. All right, so yeah, so as I mentioned before, I think let's take advantage of this kind of incredible moment in time where there's this change in perception about how we use our outdoor public spaces and how we allocate the public realm. And think about potentially introducing a pilot parklet program. There's great resources I'd be happy to share with all of you. Also take advantage of that. You've got this incredible format of the mayor's council, right? This doesn't happen very often. You've got a number of towns and cities working together, or at least creating a context for collaboration where this could be a great outcome. So I just want to share, this is Metro Nashville's pilot parklet ordinance. It's literally 3 pages. It's not that complicated, but this could really be an engine I think, for allowing many of towns and cities throughout the county to take advantage of something like this without having to go through the individual hurdle of trying to draft their own ordinance. I think this could really unlock, a lot of opportunity for our local businesses. And, this is my recommendation in terms of a next step. It's not rocket science. It's a pilot. This is nothing permanent we're talking about yet, but a pilot parklet program, I think, could go a long way in terms of enabling some of the creativity we've seen in, expressed over the last year, and the entrepreneurship of our local businesses. Let's support them, and let's support our communities by piloting something like this that can really result in long-term changes in how we think about and use public spaces in the public realm.
Well, on behalf of Mayor Kate and the entire steering committee, Shinji, Kelly Warner, and Rebecca, I want to thank all the attendees who came with their questions and energy. And I really want to thank our panelists. As I said before, you were all rock stars, and we learned so much. Thanks everyone. Have a great day and enjoy the rest of your week. Thank you.
It's been really fun. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.